Amen. You can go ahead and have a seat. Good morning, church. Good morning. We'll go ahead and dismiss my kids to their classroom for today. For the rest of us, if you've got your Bibles, go ahead and grab them. Open up to Mark. Let's see, where are we? Yes, Mark chapter 10. Mark 10 is where we'll be. We've got 2 sermons left in the Vision series. And so as we've kind of been using that illustration of building the cathedral, this is just kind of in some of that monotonous work where you're like, we're almost there, but we're still like talking about the same thing. We're getting there, still cutting the stones. But today is one that you've probably heard a lot on because the Bible speaks about it so much. But at the same time is one that maybe sometimes we'll hit the snooze button on. Maybe sometimes we'll be like, well, I already engage in this. I already do this. And so it's not that big a deal. But I want to just kind of pull you in a little bit more and just pull you in to really consider not only what we do in serving, but how we serve and sort of why we serve. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is our third value, which is the fact that we serve with humility and helpfulness. And so as we talk about humility and helpfulness in the idea of serving, I wanted to first kind of just give you a broad recap of why we serve and where that even comes about. Because actually the most fundamental principle of what it means to be human is the fact that we were created to serve. That is the most important component to us being truly human, is that God created us to serve Him. And so you see this when you talk about Genesis 1 and 2, and you walk through the creative narrative. Like, God created mankind to be image bearers of Him, to reflect honor and glory back to Him, to serve Him for His pleasure. I mean, that's like the whole purpose of it. He didn't create us because He needed us, as if He was lacking something, or if He needed a bunch of little minions to do something that He needed to get done. Like He created us to serve Him, not because He needed it, but to serve Him for His pleasure, to experience Him in a way that actually brings us pleasure. And so it's this mutual interaction that we have with God, where He is creating us and serving us in a way by experiencing or expressing Himself to us, where we receive satisfaction, we receive joy, we receive pleasure in that. But in response to that, we also then echo back and serve back to Him His honor and His glory and His reflection. We're basically telling Him how awesome He is, and in that He's honored and glorified. But in telling Him how awesome He is, He in return is satisfying us by doing that. And so this idea of why we were created was to ultimately, and this is again the Westminster Confession, the first question of it is, what is the chief end of man? Why did God create us? Well, He created us to enjoy Him forever, to worship Him and enjoy Him forever. And so this idea of serving and enjoying God are so connected to one another that if we don't realize that, then when we serve, if we don't serve from that mindset of it actually being the most fundamental thing that we were created to do, then we will serve out of a separate bucket or category that is, well, this is just my duty. This is just what I'm supposed to do. This is just what they ask me to do. And you will then, in that vein, run dry. Like, you will burn out. You will find ways to complain about serving because, again, it's not ultimately connecting it to why God created you in the first place. And so if you kind of just look at the creation narrative, the first 12 chapters of Genesis, you get God who creates all of mankind. And again, as I think it's Kirk Wellum who says this in an essay titled Serving God, Genesis 1 and 2 explains that God, the Creator, made all things out of nothing by the agency and power of His Word, and that He, as the sovereign of the universe, did so for His honor and glory. So everything he created is serving the purpose of his honor and glory. In other words, all of creation, nature and mankind, was created to serve God's pleasure and find it themselves pleasing. So it would be similar to like the poet who creates a poem for others to read. Not only is it sharing their imagination with others to enjoy, but in turn it pleases the poet. Serves the poet's pleasure for others to enjoy them. And again, this is the chief end of mankind. And so as he's created us, he's created a people to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And as they are doing that, as they are filling the earth and subduing it, as they are exercising dominion over it, they're doing it in a way that is reflecting who God is, what his nature is, the fact that he exercises dominion over everything, the fact that he is creating and being fruitful and multiplying, the fact that he is doing that and then ingraining that so that we are able to rightly see, as we call the book of nature. We look at the mountains and we say, this has come from something else. Like these did not just spring up on their own out of a big bang and they're like, wow, look at that. Chaos produced that. No, chaos did not produce that. Logos produced that. We look at the ocean for the first time and we see its expanse and how terrifying it is, that it's only really been like 5% discovered. And we look at that and we think, wow, like there's something greater than that, bigger than that. But if we begin worshiping the mountain or worshiping or serving the ocean, again, that's the idolatry. That's where we continue to run into the issues of humanity is we don't serve God by honoring him and glorifying him in what he has done. We then kind of create it into our own. And that's exactly what Adam and Eve did. And so they sinned and they fell by worshiping creation over creator. And then God just continues serving us by restoring and trying to pull us back into what a right relationship would be. It's getting us back to his whole reason for why he created us, is so that we honor and glorify him, and in that we receive the most joy. We receive the most life that is to be had. And so, for example, by using the mountain and the ocean, if you're like, the mountains are so inspiring, I want to move there. I want to move there and I want to live among them. Well, after 6 months, you're going to be like, I need a bigger mountain. Like this one wasn't good enough. So like maybe you move to the Smokies. We were just talking to Gabe about Gatlinburg. Like maybe you move to the Smokies and you're like, this is amazing. This is awesome. And then you're like, maybe I should have went to the Rockies. Because the Rockies are where it's at. And it's like, you know what? The Alps really look good this time of year. And so like you just keep moving around because it's not good enough. And then you're like, you know what? I really hate flat land, but I love flat water, so let me move to the ocean. And like, let's go there. And it's like, we went to Miami. We lived there for 2 years. And I remember like the first year, it was like every other weekend, we're like, let's drive 4 miles. That takes us an hour to get there because it's Miami. But let's do that, and let's go spend some time at the ocean. And so we were doing that like every other weekend. And then all of a sudden, there was this span of like 6 months where we didn't go to the ocean at all. And I was like, why are we here? Like we're living in a destination spot. But why? It's because like the ocean lost it's like we didn't care about it anymore. And so that's what happens with humanity is sin and our fallen nature takes what God has created, and when we don't see Creator and we only see the creation, it loses its lackluster. Like it's no longer serving its purpose anymore. And we've got to get to a place where we're seeing the purpose of creation in the book of nature, and we're able to see the fingerprints of God, and we're able to see all that he has created to serve that purpose of us seeing him and his beauty and his majesty and his creativeness, his imagination, and what he has done in the creation, while at the same time then honing in on one another and seeing how God has created us for the purpose of, again, serving him. So that when we see people honoring God and reflecting God and glorifying God with their lives, that actually also begins serving us by saying, look how wonderful and majestic and beautiful God is because of how this person loves like Jesus, because of how this person teaches like Jesus, because of how this person serves like Jesus has served. And so he's been doing this whole thing all the way up to Genesis 12, where he then creates the covenant relationship with Abraham. And again, Abraham has a son, Isaac, and then Isaac has a son, Jacob. And Jacob, they changed his name to Israel because he has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. But what do? Those 12 sons continue to do the exact same thing that everyone before them did. They keep falling, they keep sinning, they keep sinning. They are no longer serving God the correct way. And what it actually does is when you see the 11 sons sin against Joseph, whom again who Jacob loved, they sold him, or they tried to kill him, they tried to bury him. I mean, you can see the imagery of Jesus here. He ends up getting sold into slavery in Egypt. But what does that do for them? Does that make them flourish in Canaan? Does that make them flourish in the land that God has provided for them? No, it becomes a desolate place because that's what sin does. Like no longer are they experiencing God serving them, and no longer are they serving God, and it just creates desolation. It creates destruction. And what happens? They then go to Egypt because where Joseph was, where Jesus is, there is flourishment. There is source. There is life. There is Him serving us as we serve Him. And that's exactly what Joseph is picturing in his story, where he creates or climbs the ranks of the Egyptian culture and policy there, to where he becomes essentially the right-hand man to the king there and rules over all of it. So that when the Israelites eventually come to Egypt, because they're like, that's where life is right now, Joseph forgives them and grants them life. He grants them source. He's like, here's a place where you can live, be fruitful and multiply. Like it is bringing back in the exact same mandate that God started with in the first place with Adam and Eve. And the Israelites flourish. I mean, they flourish in that. I mean, they become, it says at one point, 600,000 men, not counting the women and children. I mean, they are a large nation at this point, which is exactly why the Egyptians get scared. And then they say, we're going to enslave them. And that's what they do. The Israelites find themselves enslaved. And then you come to Moses, and Moses gets risen up. And God calls Moses and he says, I want you, this is moving into Exodus now. He says, I want you to free the people. Because I remember the covenant that I gave to Abraham, that I'm going to give them a land that is flowing with milk and honey, that I'm going to continue to have them be a city on a hill so that other nations will look at them. Why? Because he's pulling them back into honor and reflect me, glorify me, so that others can see it and come to know who their Creator is. That was the whole purpose. They can't do that while they're enslaved, just like we can't do that while we're enslaved. And so he calls Moses, like Jesus, to come and free the people and deliver them from the hand of sin, from the hand of Pharaoh. And so as they're coming out, one of the most interesting things that you'll see every single time Moses goes to Pharaoh and requests for him to let the people go is so that they may go and serve their God. Like, it's getting them back to the most central component of their relationship with God, is that they are meant to serve Him. To serve Him. The beautiful thing about seeing the Exodus, and even just playing that out in the imagery of our salvation, is that in order for them to get to a place where they are able to serve God again, God has to first serve them. God has to first intervene, because Pharaoh is not going to let them go. They're enslaved. They aren't rising up themselves to try to free themselves, to try to take over. I mean, you got to remember, the Israelites, how many times are referred to like sheep? They're dumb. They're dumb. They do outnumber the Egyptians, which is why the Egyptians put them into slavery. They at any moment could say, all these tools that we're using, we could just use them on the Egyptians. Like, we could just totally take them over. But again, they're dumb, and so they just don't do that. But Moses comes in, and with the honor and glory of God and the signs and the wonders of God showing up and what God executes in the 10 plagues, ultimately is what creates the opportunity for them to be released. And then again, he still has to even serve them that much more. Even when they're released, they come to the sea, and they're at the sea, and they're like, well, I mean, I don't know if we're good swimmers or not. We've been in the desert this entire time. And he says, I'm going to take care of this as well. I'm going to serve you to get you to the other place. So that when it comes to Jesus, Jesus is able to look at us and say, all the work done, needed to be done in order to redeem you and save you and deliver you, that work is on me, and it's finished at the cross. And so all of this is to pull us back into the reality that to worship and belong is actually driving us into our truest form of humanity, which is a relationship that is serving God as we are also serving one another. So that when we get into that place, we are then able to, like the Israelites and like as Christians with the mandate of the Great Commission, we are to be fruitful and then go and multiply, which again is what we'll talk about next week. But it all leads to this idea of us becoming, once again, the very thing that He created us to be in the first place, which is people who serve God because He served us in His creation of us. And so we serve because God created us to serve. Now, as we dive in, that was just kind of like a biblical theology of why we serve in the first place. When it comes to how we serve and why we serve, there is humility and helpfulness. And again, I think this is so important because, again, Jesus models this for us. He models it when you see Philippians chapter 2 and how He emptied Himself and became the form of a bondservant in order to come and serve us by taking on the form of a man, and then ultimately dying His death as an entire service in order for us to be redeemed. Why? Because we couldn't do it ourselves. When you think about going and serving, it's not because someone can do it themselves, but most of the time it's because it's something that they can't do for themselves. They either have the money for it, and so you provide them that in service to them. They can't perform. I mean, it's why when you think about automotive companies or automotive garages, they call them service departments. Why? Because most of us don't know how to serve our own vehicles. And so it's this idea of doing something for someone else that they cannot do for themselves, and therefore we serve them. Which again is why it all begins with God first and foremost. He serves us in something that we cannot do for ourselves. We cannot create ourselves. So it was a service of God to create everything out of nothing. And then from there, when we sinned, it is a service of God to then redeem us because we could not do it ourselves. And so when it comes to this idea of humility, that's where it begins with, is we cannot do this ourselves. But Jesus came and served us by humbling Himself and therefore caused us to humble ourselves. But because we are human, not in the truest form of it, but because we are fallen humans, and we've been discipled by culture, and we've been discipled by sin, we've been discipled by our upbringing that is in contradiction to God's design, which again is why He's discipling us, why He's transforming us to become more like His Son and be conformed to His image so that we rightly reflect Him. But as that is happening, we are still not fully reflecting Him in the way that we serve. And so what allows for the world to kind of trickle into that is serving with pride. Serving with status. Serving with, I do this because I want others to look at me. I do this because I want others to see me and whatever it might look like. And so I want to show you a passage here in Mark 10 where Jesus kind of draws this idea of serving back into it, but again just reminds them that when we serve, we don't serve for the purpose of creating we don't serve for the purpose of getting to the right hand of Jesus. We don't serve for climbing the ranks of status. We don't serve so that we can be seen, but we serve because, again, it is to enjoy God ultimately in the end. And so, Mark 10, I'm going to read 35 through 52, or actually 35 through 45 to begin with, from this idea of humility. And again, this one is one that, as I read through this, I see the comic relief in it of just, these guys they were with Jesus, but yet still are so fallen that are willing to ask these questions to Him where it's you just don't ask these types of questions. And this is Jesus that you're sitting in front of. But it just shows you how dumb we are, which is okay, and it's a good thing. Not that we're dumb, but we have the space and freedom to be in Jesus' presence, ask these dumb questions, and He still loves us and corrects us. So, starting in verse 35. And James and John, so I'm going to do this, but already have like incredible access to Jesus. Like if there's the 12 disciples, yes, but there's the more time that Jesus spends with Peter, James, and John. Like they're already getting more time with Christ than what some of the other apostles and disciples were able to have, but yet still have this posture in their hearts. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Which again is just so bold. It's so bold. Like, now, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that because of what they've experienced with Jesus and him so serving them and being so ready to help them along in this 3 years of ministry that he's spending time with them in, I want to believe that they feel completely safe to go to him and say, "Hey, like you are so serving us that we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Like there's a confidence there that I would actually wish we had that same confidence in just our prayer lives. Like, "Hey, God, I want you to do this for me." Now, again, we got to work with the heart issue here, but at the same time, they felt they could have that type of confidence, like that access to Jesus and ask him, "Hey, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And so Jesus then said to them, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" Which again, he there is drawing in the truth about the new covenant and what it's going to take in order to enter into that covenant. And they said to them, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, basically, "It is true, the cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." Which is Jesus' way of saying, like, the Father is determining where you are in glory. All right, like it is not for anyone on earth to kind of say, like, "Hey, if I do X amount of things, then I'll get the right-hand seat at Jesus. Or if I do X amount of things, I'll get the larger mansion." Again, it's God is working out. The Father is working out through our lives and how we serve and where we serve and what we experience in suffering. And basically, if you're thinking in your head, and this is something that I was taught in growing up, is like every time you do an act of service, it's shooting a brick up to heaven to just add on to your mansion. And so I had that kind of understanding and mentality that, yeah, like the more I do, the more I get. And there's some truth to that, if you remember a sermon I preached on a few months ago. But, again, it comes back to the heart posture of, why am I doing it? Like, am I doing it to essentially gain there in a prideful way, similar to how secular culture here serves themselves in what they do in their lives and how they, I want to make as much money as I can, to be as rich as I can, to buy as much as I can, and just have that lifestyle. Well, like, if that's my mentality of heaven, then I'm no different. Like, it's just sinful. So there's got to be something different to it, and that's what kind of Jesus is drawing out here. He's like, God's going to determine all of that, so don't put your mindset there. Don't think about it there, which is just pride. He's trying to draw that out in them. "But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, which is great, because they also had the boldness to ask these questions in front of the, like, "Hey, Jesus, can we sit at your right hand and your left? Don't worry about these other dummies. Like, don't worry about the other 10 that can hear us right now." Like, it's like an open meeting that they're having with Jesus. And Jesus called to them and said to them, oh, wait, I skipped a part. "But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John, rightfully so. And then Jesus called them to him and said to them, You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. So here's where he's getting to their heart. He's saying those who are ruling secularly, which is their way of saying Gentiles. So it'd be like our way of here saying like those who are non-Christian, and the way that they lead others, the way that they rule, the way that they run a company, the way that they run a country, the way that they exercise authority over others is by posturing themselves in a way that is saying, you are lesser than me and you need to listen to me. I carry all authority, and so you just need to do what I say. Like they lord it over them. I am your Lord, and you will trust me. You will follow me. You will do what I say. And he's looking at James and John, and he's saying, what you're requesting in pride is essentially you are greater than the other 10 disciples right here. Like you're better than them. You're lording your position and posture over them, and it shall not be among you. Like he's saying, you're essentially taking the idea of Roman Empire, and you're now trying to syncretize it. You're trying to pull it into what we're creating in the new kingdom, and you're trying to merge those two things together. And he's saying that's not how this kingdom is going to operate and function. That's not the way God is creating this new Christendom. Like it's not going to be those who are in high positions make sure that everyone else understand that, and make sure that everyone else get in line and follow that. He's saying that's not how we're going to do this. This is not bishop is Lord. This is not pastor is Lord. This is not Caesar is Lord. But rather, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. If someone is going to be in a position of leadership, they must first serve. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. He's saying this is really the creation of servant leadership, where it is a posture that is saying we are equal, though we may be distinct in our roles and skills and what God has called us to do in the functioning of the body of Christ. But we are not more than you. We are not greater than you. And that's why he finishes it off with 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so he's giving them this posture of, you're called to serve, but in the way that you serve, don't try to put yourself at the top as a place to be served. That's not what he's creating in Christendom. So he's trying to essentially establish that there's no room for pride in Christendom. There's no room for it. It's got to be operating from a place of humility, willing to be the servant of all, just as Jesus, the Son of Man, came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And so we serve with that same mindset. We serve with having the mindset of Christ in Philippians 2. We serve based on the fact that we're nobodies. We're nobodies. I think, again, I don't, I'll quote him because he said it a long time ago and it was a good quote. But Mark Driscoll one time said, we are a bunch of nobodies telling everybody about somebody. Like that's what we are doing. As Christians, we're a bunch of nobodies telling everybody about somebody. And that is beautiful. That's beautiful. There's a reason why you hardly remember anyone who were profound Christians 100 years ago. Because it's good to be forgotten. It's good to be forgotten. It's good not to be known. It's good to do the work that is pointing people to Jesus. And I think this goes all the way back to John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. Like when we spread this church and we engage the community around us, It's not for the sake and renown of the district church. It's not for the sake and renown of Dwayne or Ransford. It's not for the sake and renown of our ministry team. It's not for the sake and renown of our members. It's not for that. It's for Jesus. Again, God is serving us and redeeming us, rescuing us, saving us, forgiving us. He's serving us in that so that we then serve Him by making everything in our lives about Him. He didn't serve us so that we can get puffed up and say, look how awesome we are. Like, again, I think that's one of the biggest criticisms that Christianity gets, is that we posture ourselves as better than the community around us. And again, I would say it's predominantly unfair in the critique, but I think there are areas within our Christianity that has rightfully earned that critique. Because again, we're trying to make a name for ourselves rather than making a name for Jesus. And so that's why we instill this into our values, and what we want to be cultivating in our church is that we serve with humility. One of the best places for you to be is someone who serves your entire life for the sake of the gospel and people coming to know Jesus, so that hundreds, if not thousands of people come to know Jesus but don't know you. That's like, if you get to the end and you stand before the Lord, and when you're standing before the Lord, there's a sea of hundreds, thousands of people behind you coming to know the Lord, but none of them know your name. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. Well done. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. And I think that's what Jesus was telling James and John here. It's not for you to determine where your status is, where your posture is, where your position is. God's going to work all of that out. Trust that. What you are to do is to be considered least among your body. And then serve in that way. Serve from that place. And then the second thing that we do is that we serve with humility and helpfulness. So we serve with helpfulness. We look for opportunities to fix things, to improve things, to build things, because God is restoring and making all things new. God is doing this work. He is restoring and making all things new, and it's essentially like going to work with Dad. Like, that's what we are doing when it comes to serving God with helpfulness. If you look at the next part of Mark 10, verse 46, is an opportunity of helpfulness for an individual. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. Which I just wonder if, who was it that was rebuking this man from trying to cry out to Jesus? Like, in the context, Jesus is saying he's being followed by his disciples and a great crowd. Like, we're at the people who are professing to be followers of Jesus, who are rebuking this man and saying, don't bother Jesus. It wouldn't be out of the norm. Remember when the little children tried to come to Jesus? And what did they do? Hey, you lesser thans, get away from him. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? Like, the kingdom of heaven is for these. Like, let them come to me. Like, why would you go out of your way to keep anybody from coming to me? And I just think it is consistent in this passage. This blind beggar, probably to a degree, and I think, again, even just the writer of Mark putting these in next to each other is driving the point home that, hey, if you're prideful, you're going to rebuke the blind beggar who's trying to get to Jesus. There's going to be someone in your culture, in your sphere of influence, where you're going to look at them and say, we don't want you to be a part of our church. Like, you don't fit. You're a nuisance. You're a nuisance. And we don't want you to be a part of it. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, which I love that. Jesus didn't just go to the man and say, it's kind of like the ones who were rebuking this man saying, hey, don't bother Jesus. Jesus tells them, hey, you go tell him. Like, again, Jesus could have just said it himself. But he employed the ones who were rebuking the man to then go and experience what it would actually be to serve this man. To serve this man. He gave them an opportunity to be corrected. He gave them an opportunity to then engage what would bring them joy rather than a heart posture that is greater than or better than. Call him. And so they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up. He's calling you. All right, so now take heart. Why? Because they probably had to change a heart. Take heart, get up. He's calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and he came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? Again, kind of that same question that Jesus had with his disciples when his disciples said, hey, we want you to do something for us. Jesus here is showing that, again, with verse 45, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so this man is coming to him and Jesus is serving him. Jesus is saying, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and then followed him on the way. Followed Jesus. I love that. Jesus could have, in the moment, just been like, hey, you know what? I see that you're blind. That's obvious. You know what? Just follow me. Yeah, I don't need to help you with that. Just follow me. Just trust me. And I think sometimes with Christianity, this is going to sound heretical, but follow me here. Sometimes we say, we just need to just preach the gospel. We just need to tell them about Jesus. That's all they need. True. But sometimes we use that as an excuse to not look into our resources to help. To help. And so I think there's something to that where Jesus is calling us in our service to him and in our service to others for the sake of him, that we need to steward better what he has provided for us so that we can actually help others with practical deeds of helpfulness. We can look around us. I mean, when Jesus was looking at the 5,000 people who needed to be fed, we know he can drop manna from heaven, right? He could have just said, you know what? They ran a play back in the Old Testament one time where it just fell from the sky. So everyone's hungry. They're all grumbling right now. Let's just do this miracle. But instead, he finds this boy who has a lunchbox with some fish and loaves. And he says, you know what? I'm going to see if this boy, I'm going to have him come up. I'm going to have him provide. I'm going to take from his resources, and I'm going to multiply that out. And I think that's exactly what he is calling us to do. He's saying, like, let's look at your resources. Again, that he's already given to us. He's already provided to us. And he says, when you look out at the community around you and you start asking the questions, what does it need? How can it be helped? The reality is that the needs are already provided for. It's just we've not released them yet. That's the reality. All the resources that are needed in the entire world are already provided for. Like, there doesn't need to be a recreation of manna falling from heaven. It's here. It's just whether or not we're prideful and holding it, or whether or not we're humble in releasing it. And this is what he's called us to do. He's called us to go in and be fruitful and multiply and spread the earth in the earth as the waters cover the sea, the glory of God in the proclamation of the gospel. But in doing that, treat it like it's our family where we take care of it, we serve it, we provide for it, we fix things, we clean things. Like Christianity, if you think about a household, like right now, obviously y'all know I've got 3 boys that every single day they want to renovate the house. And what I mean by that is they destroy things. It's just every day's demo day. And so every night is me coming behind them and before they go to bed saying, hey guys, we're going to clean up a couple of things, all right? But again, they clean up messes by smearing things. It's like, okay, they did one thing, but then it created another thing. And so after they're finally in bed, after they've done a little bit of kind of helping, trying to get them on this place of taking responsibility for their issues and their brokenness by, hey, we made a mess, and we want to come to God with our mess, and we want to ask for forgiveness for our mess. But you know what? We're going to help in the process of picking this up. But in that, after they go to bed, it's 30 minutes. Every night, it's 30 minutes of just walking around and just restoring our home. Putting things back in the places that they're in. Well, as Christians, as Christendom, that's what God has essentially called us to do in our world. In our world. Like, non-Christians are the toddlers who are making a mess of things. It's just true, all right? Now, we make a mess of things too because we're still fallen as well. But everyone's making a mess of everything. And we're called to cultivate our culture around us for the sake of Jesus and his name. We're called to clean up the mess. We're called to serve in this way. And so we're called to go out and beautify what has been broken. This is what God has called us to do. And so if as a Christian or as a church, as a new kingdom that's here in this kingdom, if we only stay within our walls and we only do the business in the walls of being disciples who are growing in the knowledge of God and who are growing in our worship of him and who are working on our songs and working on our intellect and working on our Bible studies and working on those things, but we never get outside of that and go into the world, not be of the world, but go into the world to steward it, to cultivate it, to clean it up. If we don't serve it with the gospel, we're bad parents. As a church, we're a bad church. We're a bad Christianity. And we're actually not reflecting God fully. It's just true. He came into the form of a bondservant to serve. Not to be served, but to serve. And he's called us to do the exact same thing. He's called us to go into the mess and begin cleaning. Begin cleaning. Again, with, both with practical deeds of helpfulness, but ultimately with the gospel. Ultimately with the gospel. And that's why, again, I think he grabbed the 5 loaves of bread because he's saying, hey, I'm going to feed you with this. But I need you to also know that there's a greater bread. The bread of life. Just like with the woman at the well, hey, I'm going to help you draw this water, but I need you to know that there's a greater water. There's living water. He still drew the water for her. He still provided that for her, but also gave her something greater than that. And that's what we're called to do as Christians, as believers, is serve with humility, but also serve with helpfulness. We are to go into our society and look for the areas where they are thirsting for water and they are hungry for bread, and we provide those things while also providing the living water and the true bread of life, Jesus Christ himself. And so we got to do it. We got to do it. And that's why, again, we're to engage these conversations in our community groups. That's going to be one of the biggest kind of routes right now. We will do some things as a church, like together. We're looking to do a big thing this summer over here with the school and potentially even with Gabriel Missionary Baptist Church, which is about 5 doors down that way. They're going to partner with us, and we're going to do a work over here with the school that is engaging the community with, again, intellect. We want them to know who Jesus is, and so we'll do some like Bible study clubs there. But at the same time, looking for practical deeds of helpfulness for the community around. And so we're going to do that. We're going to take a week, and we're going to do that this summer. And it's going to be great. We need to do that. But we also don't want to just say we're going to do it 1 week a year. And so we wanted to work in some extra rhythms of what it looks like to serve. And so as community groups, you're having conversations and discussions about how your group can engage with that, can serve that. And so you're maybe looking for organizations around the community. Maybe even you're just looking at where your community group meets, and you're saying, we drive around this neighborhood all the time. How can we go around that 30 minutes at nighttime and just restore this? Like, honestly, one of the easiest things is when I'm driving around my house, outside of our neighborhood, it just seems like everyone believes that the street is just where you recycle. And so you just, whatever you got, you just throw it out. You just throw it out. And so it just looks like it's snowed, but it's just paper and everything. But like, what would it be to just, hey, I'm going to be a good parent to this culture around us. I'm going to be fruitful and multiply. I'm going to go and I'm going to serve the community. And I'm just going to clean up. I'm going to take a trash bag and just clean up. It doesn't have to be seen. But we're called to steward. We're called to cultivate. We're called to beautify what's broken. Because that's exactly what Jesus is doing. So look for ways in which you can do that. Maybe as a group, you go around your neighborhood. You get some trash bags and you clean up your neighborhood. And as you're cleaning up the neighborhood, you pray for each house. God knows who they are. You might not. You can look it up, the deeds online. But at the same time, just pray for them. If you see them outside, hey, can we pray for you right now? I know that might sound weird, but can we pray for you? Is there anything that you're anxious about right now? And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, people are like, well, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a believer. I don't go to church. I don't do that. But sure, you can pray for me. Most of the time, people are willing to allow you to pray for them. And then you say, would it be all right if I followed up on that prayer in a couple of weeks? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe. They're not going to think you're going to come back. But then come back. Hey, we've been praying for that. How's the job hunt been going? How's your son's leg? Whatever it is. Follow up with it. Let's do this. Again, I just want to drive that so much more this year, that don't just hear this as, I'm so glad that we value serving as a church. Or, I'm glad that we value serving as a church. I'm going to go serve. I'm going to go serve. And there's thousands of ways. You were created to serve. So you can serve in your home, you can serve in your work, you can serve in your church, you can serve in your community, you can serve because that's how God designed you and created you. There's a plethora of ways to serve. So if you're asking, how do I serve in the church? Come talk to us. We'll figure out a way. How do I serve in the community? Figure it out. Just start. Just do it. It's what He's called us to do. Do it with humility and do it with helpfulness. And as I've been saying, we model it primarily after Jesus because that's exactly what He did for us. As Philippians 2 says, He took the form of the bondservant and He came and He dwelt among us. He humbled Himself to the point of death on a cross. The biggest need you and I had. How do we pay off our debt of sin to God? Sure, we're liars. Sure, we're thieves. We're, adulterers. We're all the 10 Commandments broken. We're idolaters. What we're supposed to do, we don't do. God, I have needs. I need to get those things fixed. God, I don't steward well, and so I need help with finance. God, I need you to serve me. But at the end of the day, the greatest need of God serving you was dealing with your debt of sin. Because what the payment of it is death. And so if I'm coming to God and saying, hey, I owe you a debt and I want to pay it off, God's saying, all right, if you want to do it yourself, here's what it is. You're going to spend eternity in hell. That's if you want to do this yourself, If you want to pay it off, that's what it's going to take. You're going to spend eternity in hell because of your sin. That's his just punishment. And he's rightfully so to do that. All right, God, is there another option? Is there another application I can fill out? I don't want to pay it off. I don't want to do that. He says, absolutely. I knew you couldn't do it, and so I sent my son, Jesus. He humbled himself, and he went to the point of death on a cross. And all of my anger towards your sin, all of my wrath towards it, all of my hatred of every broken thing that you've ever done, the mess that you created that frustrates me to no end, I poured it out on him. He broke his body. He shed his blood. And I'm satisfied with it. God is satisfied with it. And so then he says, if you'll believe in him, if you'll believe in what he accomplished and what he did, and you trust that it is finished, that his work is good enough to forgive you of your sins, I'll save you. I'll save you. And then, because he's satisfied, he resurrects Jesus and he makes him into a glorified body. And he says, guess what? I'm going to do the exact same thing for you. I'm going to make you a new creation. Because your old creation, it can't reflect me rightly. It can't serve me rightly. It cannot be what I created it to be. So I'm going to make you a new creation. And in this new creation, you're going to work that out. You're going to figure out what that looks like for the next however long you're alive on this earth. But you're going to learn to test drive. You're going to learn to drive this new creation that you are. And it's going to be one that worships through prayer and God's word. It's going to be a new creation that belongs to an authentic and diverse community. And it's going to serve with humility and helpfulness. That's what you're going to do. And I'm going to empower you to be able to do that because of what Jesus did at the cross. So you're welcome. That's what God's telling you. You're welcome. And that's where we receive that with joy and excitement. Like we receive that with complete thankfulness. Why? Because there was nothing we did for it. Nothing we did. Free gift of grace. Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. Free gift of grace. Not anything that we did to deserve. And so we come to him with thankfulness, which is really what produces humility. I didn't do this. Jesus did it for me. Man, I don't deserve this. But he granted it to me freely. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. So if you believe that, I want you to go ahead and stand. We partake of communion together because we come around that one truth, that Jesus did it all for us. He served us in this way, making it possible for us to, as true humans, the new creation, to serve him with our lives. And so if you believe that, I want you to come down, grab the elements, and then we will partake together.